All right. All right, Brubs. Back with Beer Money by Francis Stroh, a memoir of privilege and loss. Whitney and I had been lying around the house all day, watching MTV and microwaving Stouffer's frozen French bread pizzas. The August air swelled with the metallic scent of an imminent thunderstorm. My father puttered around the house with his camera, polishing lenses and blowing dust off at me every time I walked past him in the kitchen. He sat down and pulled the fisheye lens out of its leather case. "Hi, Franny," he said warmly when I glanced over his shoulder. "Got another party tonight?" It was the summer after my senior year, and I had been out every night. My father let me drive his Voyager minivan, even though I had totaled his Buick just a few months before, resulting in emergency surgery to eradicate the hematoma trapped inside the shattered cartilage of my nose. "It's Spence's birthday," I said. Spence was my boyfriend that summer. The boyfriend who'd blown his entire summer job salary to keep us both high on coke. So cool. So risque and cool. "Just don't wreck my car," my father said with a teasing smile. He reached out and tweaked my nose. He was in a good mood. "Make sure to avoid the fictitious dog, too." "Huh? Hun?" He loved pointing out that he hadn't bought my alibi the previous winter, that I'd swerved his silver Skylark sedan into a telephone pole on the opposite side of the road to avoid hitting a golden retriever. "There was a dog," I said with a straight face. "Right." It was a dark morning in January that the wreck had happened. Partying our way through the inevitable depression of a Michigan winter, my friends and I had been out all night, then attended a sunrise meditation class at the Hare Krishna Mansion in Detroit. The Krishna Center was located on the sprawling estate of the Fisher Mansion, one of the old Detroit houses emblematic of the automotive industry's heyday, donated to the sect by Elfie Ford. Meditation, music, drugs, and alcohol, they were all facets of the same mind expanding trajectory, especially potent when combined. My friends and I all had read On the Road and the Electric Kool-Aid acid test, and with the help of state of the art amphetamines and a healthy dose of cynicism, we had taken the legacy of the 50s and the 60s to new heights in the 80s. The Corinthian pillars of the meditation hall were edged in gold. A robed, pot bellied man with a Krishna ponytail sat lotus style facing the large group. We sat down in our stocking feet and tried to look spiritual. Sweet smelling incense burned in all four corners of the vast room. And now the chanting began. I glanced around at the other meditators as their voices rose. A beautiful woman with a shock of buzzed orange hair was sitting alongside us, cross-legged. Annie Lennox, her knee just inches from mine. Recognizing her immediately, we broke into ecstatic, wide-eyed smiles. We were living a cultural moment, absorbing her palpable aura of celebrity, metabolizing a cocktail of gorgeous chemicals, chanting Hari Rama, Krishna, Krishna, Hari Hari. We had finally arrived. Annie was stunning, younger than we would have thought, and amazingly a real person. Her voice converged with ours like a train, escalating to the heavens, echoing off the Baroque gold leaf ceiling of the Fisher Mansion ballroom with the rapturous beat of life itself. After the meditation class, my friends and I popped codeine tabs to soften the landing, then trudged through the snow back to my father's car. The roads were thick with ice. The overcast January sky hung low like the dark concavity of an overturned bowl. I started the engine. Road conditions never worried me, even in blizzards. I could drive on ice blindfolded. I accelerated quickly, skidding against the curb. "Whoa!" everyone shouted, laughing. They smoked and debated the age of Annie Lennox. seat belts still unbuckled. The lawns were buried under filthy old snow. No other cars on the road. I accelerated again, feeling the pedal give obediently beneath the stiff leather sole of my right cowboy boot. Brick houses whipped past us in blurs of reddish brown. The car heater roared with cold air. I pulled a Marlboro from my pack. No one could find a lighter, so someone in the back seat just held out a lit cigarette. I turned around and leaned into the back, my left hand still on the wheel, my starved lungs drawing on that fragile point of light with mighty focus. The last burning ember within miles, but my cigarette didn't catch right away, and that's when it happened. We slammed to a stop with a great exploding sound, our bodies thrown backward as if from an electric shock. Then everything stopped again. A telephone pole, I saw, stood inches from my face just beyond a windshield web of shattered glass. The front of the car was an accordion of crushed steel. I was still in the driver's seat. We were all still in our seats. Shit, everyone said at once. We were alive, though. My father put his lens back into the side pocket of his camera bag and buttoned it shut. What kind of dog did you say it was again, Franny? He asked me, still amused. I picked up the dust off and blew some air at the back of his head. Hey, stop that, he shouted good-humoredly. He glanced around. Where the hell did your mother go, anyway? No idea, I answered. My mother's mysterious absence was hardly unusual. She had been out even more since my father quit his marketing job at the brewery after a fight with my Uncle Peter. I poured a Coke over ice and went into the library where Whitney sat watching the music video of Burning Down the House. This woman's got great memory. David Byrne's absurdly blank expression bobbed around on the screen as flames consumed a suburban dwelling. In the weeks that followed the car wreck, my parents hardly mentioned it. I had been expecting consequences like being grounded from driving, but there weren't any. The huge splotches of blood they saw on my fisherman's sweater when they met me at the hospital, the steering wheel had saved my life, but done a number on me in the process, subdued them, not dude them. Thankfully, my friends had all walked away unharmed. Then February brought the distraction of good news. I'd been accepted to Duke on early decision. My spotty career as a boarding school cast-off turned public school lawn urchin had finally ended. I'd made the grade. My parents were thrilled. After that, I'd spent the last months of high school skipping classes more often than usual, drinking beer on the lawn of the War Memorial or getting stoned in the parking lot of Angel Park. I figured I'd earned it, and Mr. Lemieux, the assistant principal, still gave me a big hug at graduation when he handed me my diploma. South High was the first school where the administration and faculty had actually liked me, no matter how many of their rules I'd broken. My mother's car pulled into the driveway just then, and through the fish fly covered screen door we could hear her calling us outside. Francis, Whitney, let's go for a drive. I turned off the TV, David Byrne's autistic face vanishing to some nihilism further yet. We drove to the end of our cul-de-sac, and she parked near to the golf course. We never came down here. Something was clearly wrong. My mother didn't get out of the car. She wore a sleeveless blouse, Bermuda shorts, and her signature beat-up penny loafers. Her red hair had lost its luster. Her once thickly lashed green eyes looked dull and lifeless, and her years of playing backgammon in the sun on the club's upper deck had left her badly freckled. Dad and I are getting divorced, she blurted out, still gripping the steering wheel. I knew right away this must have been her idea. My father had been acting out for years, coming home drunk, yelling at all of us. In several fits of frustration, I'd even told my mother to do this. Divorce him. Now that it was really happening, I felt a confusing mixture of shame and elation at the power I seemed to have over their lives. I glanced down at her cottage cheese thighs. Jesus Christ, she was 51. How would she ever find someone else? I turned to look at Whitney in the back seat. His eyes were opened wide with shock as he scanned my face for a reaction. Neither of us spoke. But Dad doesn't know this yet, she continued. My attorney is out of town for 3 weeks, and I can't tell Dad until he's back. She looked at us both sternly. I just needed you to know so that you could adjust before school starts. So, will you promise me, both of you, that you won't say anything to Dad? Whitney and I both looked down and muttered our agreement. Satisfied, my mother turned the car around and took us back to the house, driving too quickly up the driveway, along the fringes of which my father had erected dozens of 3 feet tall metal reflector rods poking out of the grass. Ostensibly, the reflectors protected the lawn from tire marks, but this obstacle course only served to send my father into a rage each time someone knocked over a reflector or the trip up or down on the trip up or down the driveway. Usually he would run out of the house to yell at the potential offender before it even happened. The next 3 weeks I spent packing for college and observing my oblivious father with nagging waves of guilt and sadness. I knew he would be crushed when he finally got the news, but by then I'd be gone. Are you excited? He asked me one day, standing in the doorway to my room as I sorted my cassettes. Or are you going to miss us? I felt a sharp sting in my sinuses and suppressed the urge to cry. I slotted some YouTube bootlegs into my cassette traveler. Both, Dad, I said, my voice uneven, but we were talking about different things. They would be the world he imagined I'd miss was already gone. He just didn't know it yet. Poor Dad. Poor Peter. Fence in Detroit. Let's see how long this next one is. Not bad. I can probably read it. Fence in Detroit, 1984, by Frances Stroh. Yeah, what a photographer she was. When I arrived home for Christmas after my first semester at Duke, where I'd been learning to balance the enormous workload with nightly and often all night parties, my father was living temporarily in a 2 bedroom house on Mapleton Road, known as the Maids Road. My mother, who'd recently become a small time Grosse Pointe real estate baron, had rented the house to him while she kept the big house on Provincial Road, or is it Provincial? Christmas Day, my father came over in a jacket and tie as my mother's guest. Out of habit, he built the fire in the living room, welcomed the relatives at the door, took photographs of our group standing before the fireplace, the flames blazing behind us, but the tension of his dominance was gone, leaving in its wake an unsettling disorder. By the fireplace, I watched Whitney set a glass down on an antique table without using a coaster. My father said nothing. Late the night before, after a party, I'd come home long past curfew without any concern about my father's reaction. Bobby and Charlie talked loudly in the kitchen, drinking beer after I'd gone to bed, and now our relatives' cars were parked haphazardly outside in the driveway, not in the neat lines my father had always enforced. It was Christmas, my father's favorite day of the year, and everything was going to seed. He seemed distracted, smiling vaguely in the direction of laughter, changing lenses on his Leica more often than necessary. I wished I could comfort him. He appeared entirely unmoored. Let's get one more shot, he kept saying to the four of us. Who knows when you'll all be home together again. We lined up in front of the fireplace a third time. The heat burned into my back through my silk blouse. Charlie had recently been honorably discharged from the Marines and was sporting civilian clothes. Bobby and Whitney wore blue blazers and ties. My father snapped the shutter. He lifted his cigarette from the ashtray and looked around the room for another background. The house felt empty without his guitars, his cameras, his mountains of pipes, books, and CDs. The snow fell hard, thickly blanketing the roads within minutes of the snowplow's last round of exertions. People kept arriving at the house, Aunt Mard plunging her walker into the snow, Grandmother Susie in her mink coat and chinchilla hair, and dinner was postponed in favor of more cocktails. My father took coats and mixed drinks while my mother checked the turkey in the roaster. Bobby and Charlie appeared momentarily in the kitchen and beckoned me out and up the back stairs. Bobby opened the door to his room. 3 finely cut lines of cocaine sat in a row on the glass top of his desk. Here, Franny, Bobby said, handing me a rolled up bill. You go first. A bird's wing fluttered inside my chest. My brothers had never offered me drugs. Bobby's mystifying room, where as a child I had spied on him kissing his girlfriend on the bed, where I had learned about sex from the porn magazine stored in the top drawer of his desk, had now become the place where the gap between me and my much older brothers of age, gender, untold worlds of experience would forever close. Charlie sat on the bed smiling at me. His Marine crew cut hadn't yet grown out, underscoring the impossibly sharp angles of his face. He still lived in Southern California, where he was looking for a job. Go ahead, Franny, he said encouragingly. You'll like it, I promise. Once upon a time, Charlie's childhood room had been my refuge. Sit down, princess, he would say, patting the bed. And after we'd strung our bead necklaces, he'd tied mine behind my neck with kind, gentle fingers, as if not to break me. I took the bill from Bobby and inhaled the line in one swift motion. Wow, I said, feeling the searing heat spread through my sinuses. That's intense. Don't worry, said Bobby. That's the worst part. Just hold on. I let them believe this was my first time. Bobby did his line and Charlie followed. Bobby smeared his finger on the glass and rubbed the residue on his upper gums. He had a trim brown mustache and steely blue eyes that revealed no emotion whatsoever. We could hear our mother calling us from downstairs, but we lingered, pretending we hadn't heard her. I sat down on the bed. The room was so cold I could see my breath. Bobby leaned back in the swiveling desk chair. Dad seems really out of it, he said. You see how he'd light a cigarette, put it down in the ashtray, then light up another? I saw him drink like 4 Cokes in an hour, said Charlie. Jesus Christ, said Bobby. He licked his gums. That man has a death wish. He unrolled the bill and slid it back into his wallet. I felt a pang of protectiveness toward my father. All day he'd been going through the motions, trying to keep up appearances. We can't imagine the hell he's been through in the last few months, I said. Anyway, at least it wasn't 4 vodkas. He's just so screwed up, said Charlie, shaking his head, his face darkening with anger. He pulled me aside earlier and told me the divorce was my fault. You believe it? Bunch of bullshit. Everyone knows it was his drinking. Who the hell knows what it was? Bobby trailed off, looking over at me. I nodded silently. We all secretly believed that Charlie's coke bust had been the catalyst that led to my parents' marriage coming unraveled, if not exactly the cause. My parents had never known how to really talk to each other or comfort each other, and what little foundation they'd had simply crumbled apart. Scripted conversations weren't enough to sustain any real sense of connection, and so my father began drinking more, while my mother took refuge in real estate and backgammon tournaments. But the fact was, they'd been headed their separate ways years before Charlie's bust ever slammed it all home. That fall, after my mother filed for divorce, my father went into rehab in hopes of getting my mother back, and the monumental weight had lifted from all of us when he became sober. Mom and Dad haven't gotten along in years, I added. That's no one's fault. Bobby looked over at Charlie. Dad quitting his job didn't help. Whatever. He's the same old prick he's always been, said Charlie. Mom did the right thing getting out. Everyone was gathered at the table when we came down, the coiffed, downy heads of great aunts and grandmothers bobbing with the conversation. Plates had been piled with turkey, mashed potatoes, and French green beans. My stomach turned at the mere sight of food. I sat down at my place, lifted my glass of wine, and took a generous sip. Everyone was talking at once, and I couldn't make out the words. The coke was speedy, the shaking of my wine glass just barely perceptible. I looked out the window and across the snow covered lawn to the forest where I'd first smoked pot with some friends back in 8th grade. The blizzard had stopped, and the sun suddenly broke through the clouds. The surface of the new snow shone like splinters of shattered glass. I emptied my wine glass and poured myself another drink. She is just a real party animal. My uncles were droning on about our family's listing in the Forbes 400. I was aware of the fact, I guess, but I'd never really associated it with us. I'd bought $100 bed for my college dorm room because the futon I wanted had been too expensive. Forbes must have done some interesting math if they thought we had that much money. The information in this issue is completely outdated, said Uncle Peter. Fact is, the riverfront projects nearly doubled the business. Someone ought to write the editor a letter. Why don't you write the letter? Chimed in Aunt Nicole, her cropped blonde hair tucked stylishly behind her ears. Above a sleek black cashmere dress. You are the CEO, aren't you? They need to get it right. It's ridiculous. Uncle Peter took a bite of turkey with stuffing, chewed and swallowed, while the table waited for his response. I'll write to them, he said finally. Send them the plans for the Park Davis site. It was a story I'd heard so many times. Uncle Peter and Coleman Young, Detroit's mayor, had shaken hands one windy day in a parking lot on the Detroit River next to the former Park Davis Pharmaceutical Company. The mayor promised Peter a stampede of tenants and greater visibility if the Strohs would develop the site, just upriver from where the Uniroyal Tire Plant had been, and thereby improve Detroit's derelict riverfront. Coleman Young, who called himself the MFIC, motherfucker in charge, certainly had the power to fulfill his promises, and Uncle Peter knew as much, though personally I found it hard to believe anyone could ever revive Detroit. Seemed a little late to me. Within a year of the famous handshake, the brewery had begun development on the site, launching a project that included a five-star hotel, a luxury 300 unit apartment building, and a 1.8 million square foot office building. The development, renamed Stroh River Place when we'd bought the site, was the most ambitious development in Detroit since the 70s, when Henry Ford II built the Renaissance Center. Did he? I didn't know that. Soon afterward, Uncle Peter closed down the turn of the century Detroit brewery and moved the corporate headquarters to the Stroh River Place, saddening not a few Detroiters who took pride in Stroh's beer being brewed in their hometown. The subsequent demolition of the historic building was even more demoralizing, but the family had already lost $100 million in production costs by keeping it open. Now the Stroh brand was produced in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in the newer Schaefer Brewing Company plant, where fire brewing copper kettles had been installed at enormous expense to stay as true to our brand as possible. And send them that article from the Detroit News, suggested Nicole. Which article? Asked my father. Nicole folded her arms across her chest, announcing that it's safe for whites to live in Detroit again because of the Strohs. Uncle Peter chuckled. That article didn't phrase it quite that way. My father, who now got all his company news at gatherings like these, shifted restlessly in his chair. Nonsense. No one gives a damn who lives in Detroit. No one's cared since the 1967 riots, except maybe the drug cartels. Uncle Peter sipped his wine. We do, Eric, he said. Nicole turned to my father's superior. We're in real estate. We're in real estate now. Everyone knew that Nicole basically ran the company behind the scenes, but no one was complaining. Dividends had recently doubled. I know that, Nicole, said my father, controlling his temper. I did work there until last summer. He made a point now to look at his brother. My mother went into the kitchen to take the pumpkin pies out of the oven, glancing at Charlie's place on her way out of the room, monitoring his alcohol intake. Charlie ignored her. He reached over my grandmother's plate for the wine bottle. My father sipped his glass of water and watched Charlie pour the wine. Keep it up, Chaz, he said bitterly. You can handle it. Seeing that my glass was empty, Charlie passed me the bottle across the table as soon as he'd filled his glass. I poured gingerly, watching the sunlight pass through the curved crystal onto the white linen tablecloth to create floating fields of red. I wouldn't always be here doing this. I wouldn't go down with the ship. For the moment, though, the wine warmed my insides and made the whole thing bearable. I picked up my fork and took my first bite of turkey, with no particular appetite for it, but it hardly mattered. The food had already grown cold. Together. Dallas, 1993. Let's see how long this chapter is. Should I go on? I probably should. Just to get this book out of the way. Charlie, Whitney, Francis, and Bobby. That kind of looks like fucking Tom Selleck. And he looks like Gene Hackman. I expected them to be more untidy. Dallas, 1993. Charlie's condo complex sat just off the freeway, sandwiched between a strip mall and a sprawling warehouse advertising storage units for rent. Park over by the gate, Charlie said to Bobby, pointing to a chain link fence with a pool on the other side. The condos were a forsaken collection of brown cardboard shoeboxes with mini balconies, each with its own laundry line. You live here? Asked Whitney from the back seat. We all got out of Bobby's Volkswagen and followed Charlie through the gate and up a cracked concrete path. It had been a little over a year since I'd seen Charlie, but he had the skin of an old hobo, mottled and bumpy, unshaved and scorched red, as if he'd been drinking moonshine under the blazing sun for the last 40 years. At 32, he'd failed 3 rehab programs within 5 years. After a series of scenes at various family events, including Bobby's wedding, my parents had banned him from coming home for holidays. When I'd called about coming down to Dallas to film him, he was full of enthusiasm. I love my family, he gushed. You know, I really miss everyone. My work had been selected as part of a group exhibition at San Francisco Camera Work Gallery entitled The Family Scene. Video screens of my family members talking would play in a darkened room simultaneously. We'd all met in Dallas for a couple of days so I could shoot the interviews, the only time the 4 of us had ever met outside a family occasion. Whitney had come all the way from Missoula, where he was a senior at the University of Montana. I had come from San Francisco, where I lived and worked as an artist. Bobby and Charlie lived near each other in Dallas, but hardly saw each other. I like to think that art had brought us back together. Hold on a second, said Charlie. We followed him past the small play area with a warped plastic slide and the jungle gym. A group of people sat at the pool smoking, complaining in raspy voices about their asshole bosses. Charlie leaned over the fence and greeted the shirtless man decorated with a collage of prison tattoos. The man mumbled something to Charlie in a conspiratorial tone. Charlie smiled. Be over soon, he said. Whitney gave me an anguished look, and Bobby just rolled his eyes. Like my parents, Bobby had given up on Charlie long ago. The freeway hummed behind us as we took the cement stairs to the second floor. Almost every door had a few pairs of well-worn flip-flops strewn outside. A bag of garbage sat leaking in the hallway. The earthy scent of pot smoke wafted out from someone's open door, and it occurred to me that this condo complex was likely the last stop. Full of drifters like Charlie, who'd lived in every condo complex in the Dallas area until this one, been kicked out each time for reckless behavior or failure to pay the rent. Charlie opened the door. We stepped into a tiny living room that merged with the kitchenette. A beige sofa I recognized from the house on Grayton Road was the only furniture other than a big Sony TV, perched on some wine crates. The air smelled like sheets that hadn't been changed. Anyone want a beer? Asked Charlie, opening the fridge to a shelf full of Coors. I realized how proud he was to be hosting us, and though I never drank during the day, took a can. What's with the piss? What's with the piss water? Asked Bobby. Got a case on special, said Charlie, the old yearning for approval audible in his voice. His big brother had finally come over to see him. No thanks, Bobby said. Bobby and Charlie's relationship had soured in recent years. When Charlie had a warrant out for his arrest in California for reckless driving 3 years before, Bobby had stepped in and gotten him a job at the Herman sporting goods store he was managing then in Dallas. More than once, Charlie had come to work drunk, eventually losing his sales position. And the friendship never recovered. Since then, Charlie had worked in a string of mini markets shelving merchandise and once at a gas as a gas station attendant. Charlie took Bobby out onto the balcony while Whitney sat on the sofa and flipped through TV channels. Through the sliding glass door, I could see my brothers talking the way they used to and wondered if deep down Bobby felt somehow responsible for Charlie. Had Bobby been the one that turned Charlie onto drugs in high school? I doubted it. All I knew was that the further Charlie fell, the more compelled Bobby seemed to feel to look away. I went into the bedroom and attached the video camera to the tripod. I arranged the chair in a corner by the window. The bed was barely made, so I straightened the blanket to create a sense of order in the room. Outside, the tattooed man held court at the pool. He smoked and talked and moved his arms wildly while everyone laughed, and I understood that all these people played a greater role in Charlie's life now than any of us did. All the missed holidays were adding up to Charlie's not really knowing us anymore. Our family was no safe harbor, but without us, he'd been set, it seemed, irretrievably adrift. Fuck is that, a gnat? Is the camera on? Asked Charlie. Not yet, I said as I adjusted the lens. Whenever he spoke, his left eye dipped into the viewfinder. Try not to move your head. I hoped to keep his identity obscured by training the camera on the bottom half of his face. All I want to see is your mouth. I turned on the camera and went through my list of questions. What was it like for you growing up in our house? How were you affected by Dad's drinking? Why do you think Mom and Dad got divorced? And so on. As he told his version of the family story, Charlie candidly discussed his coke bust in college, his years in the Marines, his downward spiral into drugs after his honorable discharge. I made some bad mistakes, he admitted, but that doesn't make me a bad person. His face began to sweat, probably from the stress of talking about the past, and I didn't want to go on for too long. I realized that while drugs had been a phase for me, they were a way of life for Charlie. After I'd gone through my list, I paused. What are you doing in Dallas? I asked. It wasn't one of my scripted questions. I'm 32 and currently unemployed, he said to the camera, his lips spreading over yellowed teeth as he broke into a smile. So let's hope the family business picks up and I can take early retirement along with everyone else. He nodded his head, still smiling. I laughed. By everyone else, I imagined he was referring to our father. So that's your hope? I asked. My number one hope and ambition is to come home for Christmas this year and see everybody, he said with a note of optimism. Then, more defiantly, Mother, I can come home and have just as much fun with my family not drinking as I can drinking with my friends. He had rightly assumed that our mother would see the footage. When we arrived at Ruby Tuesday, the bar buzzed with the local singles scene. A soccer game played silently on two enormous flat screen TVs while Eddie Vedder's throaty, tortured voice bellowed over and over from the speakers. Oh, I'm still alive. Table's ready, Bobby said over the din. The four of us walked into the restaurant, slid into a booth, and picked up the vinyl coated menus. With his Ralph Lauren model looks, Whitney seemed utterly displaced in the Formica trimmed booth. He glanced across the table at Bobby. What do you recommend? The potato skin, said Bobby, with 3-bean chili. Highly recommend. I studied the potato skin offerings. Do they pour the chili right on the potato skins? Well, if you want it poured on, you can get a twice baked potato with chili. They also have great steaks, Charlie said. He'd had 2 beers at the bar during the 20 minutes we'd been waiting for the table. Bobby had told me privately he wished Charlie weren't coming to dinner. He's guaranteed to get drunk and make a scene. He's coming, I insisted. This is my one night in Dallas. I was leaving in the morning to film my parents back in Michigan. We ordered the food and 2 pitchers of beer. The conversation floated from Bobby's vintage Volkswagen collection to his World War II uniform collection to the Stroh Brewery's poor sales record in Texas, where Bobby now worked as an area business manager for the family company, interfacing with wholesalers. It's pathetic, said Bobby. He took a long draw from his beer, leaving a mustache of foam on his mustache. We have a brewery in Longview. We make beer in Texas, for God's sake, and we can't even sell our products here. It's like the Bushes not selling beer in St. Louis, said Whitney. Bobby smeared his potato skins with sour cream. Well, more like the Bushes not selling beer in Colorado, but I take your point. Maybe we shouldn't have gone national, I said. You know, by buying Schlitz, I mean, don't you think the Detroit Brewery and the Schaefer breweries in the East would have been enough? I knew our troubles had begun when we got too big. When great Uncle John could no longer walk the brewery floor, talking with his employees on a daily basis. There were just too many brewery floors now, and Uncle Peter was far less hands on than great Uncle John had been. No, Peter was right, said Bobby. The industry was changing. Every other viable brewery had already made the move from regional to national. It's just, that we grew too fast. We were underprepared. There was no strategy other than just to grow for the sake of it, and we borrowed too much to finance the Schlitz deal, of course. That's what's killing us. Someone could have bought us out, I said. We must have been worth something. Not enough, said Bobby. Lot of mouths to feed in this family. How many brands do we make anyway? Asked Charlie. I can't keep up. Bobby dipped his potato skin into his chili, about 30. Whitney cut into his steak. And are any of them doing well? Not in the U.S., I said, through a mouthful of French fries, far as I can tell. They have Strohs on tap at the bar here, said Charlie, so sales can't be that bad. I slid past the row of four knees en route to my window seat. I took a Russian novel out of my bag and began the 5 hour dissociative stare that the flight to Detroit always called for. I put the book down and gazed out the window. They were loading the luggage onto the conveyor belt. My camera equipment sat snugly in the overhead compartment, the tape stored in the foil lined bags my father had given me at Christmas time. Never forget to put your film in here, he'd said, handing me the bags unwrapped. X-ray'll destroy everything. He still thought of me as a photographer. Why don't you keep shooting pictures? He asked me. He asked when my work had taken a new direction just after college. You're a damn good photographer. But I'd begun to feel limited working in two dimensions and had a feeling that becoming a master printer wasn't in the cards. I didn't have the patience. The truth was, I suspected I wasn't very good. I took classes at the San Francisco Art Institute after Duke, mostly in their new genres department, and there I entered the world of video, installation, and performance. I began to think in terms of narrative and space, context and concept, signs and signifiers. Later, I joined the MFA program at Art Center in Pasadena, but found that the making of art there was essentially peripheral to the reading and discussion of French critical theory. As for my loft in downtown Los Angeles with packs of wild dogs in the streets and Interstate 10 practically grazing my window, it was a lot like a scene out of J.G. Bullard's Crash. When the LA riots broke out after the Rodney King verdict, I could see 7 different buildings burning within a mile, not to mention machine gun armed militia roaming the streets of my neighborhood. LA felt like the end of the earth, and I missed San Francisco. I dropped out after my first year at Art Center. The program felt soulless and the art derivative. My own in particular. As a farewell, I did a site specific piece in the school's Bauhaus style building by silk screening over the words fire extinguisher with soul extinguisher on the rectangular black extinguisher boxes lining the hallways. My boyfriend Markle, also an artist, pulled the squeegee while 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 I held the screen. Now I was back in San Francisco and single, with a well paying job at an interior design firm, and several shows of my installation scheduled over the next year. The family piece being the first. So far, my family members were cooperating. In fact, the combination of lights, a camera, and a list of open ended questions seemed to open a Pandora's box of responses that I never could have anticipated. Everyone seemed to have a pent up need to talk. As practice, I'd been experimenting with friends in San Francisco, filming their answers to questions, then editing together only the responses, one cut after another. The stream of consciousness solipsistic effect was powerful, rather like the way it felt to be privy to interior thoughts of one of Tolstoy's characters. How's Charlie doing? My father asked. Seated in his leather armchair watching a Western, he pointed the Colt 45 revolver at the TV screen every time John Wayne pulled his six shooter from his holster. My mother had once told me of a similar scene when Charlie's baby nurse came downstairs to the library. Mr. Stroh, the poor woman announced, standing at the entrance. Charles has taken his bottle. Sitting there in full Western regalia, replete with a cowboy hat, chaps, boots with spurs, leather holsters, and a revolver in each hand, my father kept his eye on the TV. Thank you, Ivy, he said. I attached my video camera to the tripod, aiming the lens at my father. Charlie wants to come home for Christmas, I told him. My father frowned. He's drinking during the day, or only at night? Both, I said. I moved the tripod and adjusted the height so that the viewfinder framed the bottom half of his face. I'm worried about him. Is he working? Not right now. My father switched off the movie with a remote and set the gun down on the table. You'll have to talk with your mother about Christmas, he said. That's her department. I scanned my father's library for additional lights with which to better illuminate his face, but none were quite the right height. I walked through his entryway and down two steps into the sunken living room. The lushness of the garden flooded in through the picture windows. Out on the terrace, large ceramic ashtrays shaped like fish had been placed on glass surface tables. Remembering these brightly painted ashtrays from the garden parties where, as a child, I often finished the cocktails left behind, I marveled that they had lasted all these years. Through so many parties, so many moves. My father had settled into his 6-bedroom house 5 years before this. Looking around at his immaculately decorated rooms, a visitor could have been forgiven for assuming that our beer brands were thriving, goddammit. But Uncle Peter's late entry into the exploding light beer market in the 80s had kept us from competing effectively. In 1989, after a deal to sell our business to Coors had fallen through, dividends had been withheld, and the family had started attending annual shareholder meetings, something we'd never done, to be told how poorly the company was performing. Angered by our advertising cuts, wholesalers gave up on our brands, switching to rival labels, causing sales to drop precipitously. A sudden panicked repackaging of the iconic Stroh's brand to block letter blue, contributing to a 40% sales decline within a single year, was the last nail in that brand's coffin. The new packaging might have worked had we not tried to market the very same beer formula as a higher priced premium beer. As it turned out, my father hadn't saved a thing, and my mother had to lend him his mortgage money until dividends were resumed a year later. In 1990, in the aftermath of the failed Coors deal, management rallied to revive Old Milwaukee, our strongest brand, by committing an unprecedented $9 million to a new marketing blitz, the Swedish Bikini Team ad campaign. The celebrated Hal Riney agency in San Francisco came up with the concept of svelte, blonde-wigged babes with cases of beers dropping out of the sky in parachutes, or coming down river in a boat. To update the already popular, it doesn't get any better than this. Old Milwaukee ads. For the sake of variety, viewers saw a different Swedish Bikini Team commercial on TV every night. Many considered it the best beer campaign ever made. Ratings were off the charts. Then the bomb dropped. A group of female workers in the Stroh's plant in St. Paul, Minnesota, hired a powerful feminist lawyer claiming sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace and linking it to the ad campaign. The controversy sparked a national press debate over sexist themes in advertising. The fact that the Swedish bikini team had also just posed for the cover of Playboy magazine didn't help. Feminist groups everywhere used the campaign as a scapegoat. Soon, the media controversy landed on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, and the Minnesota lawsuit was headed for the Supreme Court. Stroh's finally pulled the campaign in its third month, spending minimally on advertising from that point on. It was impossible to compete with Anheuser-Busch's deep advertising pockets, and so management switched to a strategy of managing our U.S. business down while making a big overseas push, particularly in India and Russia, where Stroh's beer was fast becoming an icon of the American way of life. Out on the terrace, a light rain began to fall, pelting the ceramic fish ashtrays. I pulled a plug out from the wall and carried a lamp from the living room into the library. I'm thinking of selling this house, said my father. I put the lamp down. Already? Business isn't getting any better. He helped me plug in the lamp under a table stacked with photography magazines, and our real estate's in the damn toilet. The riverfront development, he meant. Businesses were leaving the city in droves. We'd already lost the apartment building and the hotel to foreclosures. It's amazing, I said. General Motors is making cars in Mexico, and somehow the Strohs are still stuck in Detroit. Damn right, said my father, and instead of advertising our core brands, your Uncle Peter throws tens of millions into biotechnology. Nice move, hon. On a recent family business weekend in Durham, North Carolina, I toured the impressive research center we had built in the Research Triangle Park. We were developing a drug, apparently, to treat septic shock, but I knew the likely success rate of such a venture was close to zero. More money down the drain, I agreed. We'd been delisted at Forbes, added my father, his voice taut. We'll be broke before we know it. His stress was contagious. I could feel my own heart rate picking up. I tried to calm my breathing as I adjusted the light. My mother often worried about the fact that I was an artist. She still held out hope I would get an MBA and get serious about my life, make some money, and drop all this art silliness. The chronically bad company news made me wonder suddenly if she was right. We're headed for a big fall, my father said with an air of finality. He sat back down in his chair and lit his pipe, drawing on the smoke with rhythmic breaths to get the embers going. He'd been sober 8 years now and seemed settled in his life, often seeing my mother for dinner, and even traveling with her on occasion. In many ways, they still operated as a couple, my father maintaining my mother's car. I thought it said cat. Car, my mother doing his laundry. I found their continuing friendship as reassuring as the bad company news was persistently alarming. And I know my father did as well. After their divorce, my parents had managed to brick together another foundation that seemed to bolster all of us, or at least Whitney, Bobby, and me. As long as those bricks held firm, I imagined we could live our lives productively and with resilience, even if the company itself fell apart. I looked around at the room. Leather furniture with nail head trim, antique chests of drawers, valuable volumes on the bookshelves, blackamoor figures flanking the fireplace mantel. How could we have been so clueless? Sexism and racism seemed to permeate everything, especially our beer ads. I've watched our Schlitz malt liquor and St. Ides commercials targeting at inner city African Americans and felt embarrassed about the stereotyping. These ads weren't helping sales either. No question, we were headed for a big fall. I imagined the repo man loading everything in my father's library into a truck and driving away. The money had never been mine, and probably never would be, yet the fear was as familiar as air. We'd always been on the precipice. Oh well, enjoy it while it lasts, Dad, I said, turning on the camera. It doesn't get any better than this, right? My father smiled and exhaled a cloud of smoke. That's all for now. No one's here, anyways, thankfully. Zero, zero, zeros. All zeros. All right, let's close this off. Okay. That was particularly